Hello again, and welcome to another edition of Media Watch. I'm your co-host, Eric Tate.
I'm Bob Anthony. Good to see you, Eric.
Hey, Bob. Welcome again. Back to another session, and this is brought to you with the good graces of Manhattan Neighborhood Network and EVT Educational Productions. And we'll jump right into it. Not that we're going to try to cover that much, but we want to cover some analysis of some interesting stories. Why don't we, when we air next Monday, it'll be about a week and a half since John Boehner's resignation.
Right, by the time this thing airs.
Yes. And so, to put it in perspective, the day after the Pope had his joint address before the joint sessions of Congress, House Majority Leader John Boehner said enough is enough, and he just resigned the very next day. And that was kind of like a bombshell.
Right. I mean, I watched it go across the wires, and I was like, wait a second, what happened? Was there an investigation, or was there something else that I didn't hear about? But yeah, it was a bombshell.
Yeah, and of course it threw the entire Beltway into a feeding frenzy of, well, what brought this on? And did he finally give in, or did the ultra right-wing conservatives actually get his scalp? Or and what was your take?
Were you like me? Were you wondering what investigation did I miss, or what what piece of news got past me this morning that gave that would make a good reason for him to resign this afternoon or whenever he announced it?
Did, yeah.
So I was like the rest of America, just sort of at a loss as to what's going on here.
Well, I didn't see it, but I heard that the ultra right-wing group in his caucus were jumping up and down for glee because they'd been trying to get his scalp for years anyway. But the heir apparent, and I'm not sure this is going to play out, when you see this, folk, it might be a couple of days before they have their election for the next Speaker of the House. But the gentleman that's in the front running right now, according to all the pundits, we're not making any predictions, the gentleman by the name of Kevin McCarthy. And Bob, you probably looked up exactly where Kevin McCarthy is from, because nobody really knows that much about Kevin McCarthy.
No, just from what we've researched over the last few days. I mean, Kevin McCarthy's from the 23rd District in California, and we haven't really heard that much out of him as far as what his initiatives are, what his agenda might be. So it's right. It's coming out of the ether, this name. And did you watch some of the more right-leaning Republicans sort of dance on Boehner's grave?
I didn't see it, but I heard a number of commentators talk about how joyful they were. And then they were actually positing the fact that even though Kevin McCarthy is in the lead for possibly succeeding Boehner, the same ultra-right-wing group in that House caucus is not that happy with Kevin McCarthy, and they may be trying to put forth someone else.
Right. That's exactly the read I'm getting on it. They're not satisfied with what they see so far. He said a couple. He hasn't said that much, but what he's said so far doesn't seem to satisfy them.
Well, the interesting thing is, what they call in the business a major gaffe was basically Kevin McCarthy's baptism of fire to the media right after this story started to unfold, because he actually was on Fox with, I believe, Sean Hannity. Mm-hmm. And basically it was interesting that in trying to tell Sean Hannity just who he was and why he would make a great Speaker of the House with his campaign for a strategy that would win, Kevin McCarthy basically came out and admitted something that the Democrats had been saying for months and months, and that a number of journalists had been speculating on. But the bombshell that he dropped on Sean Hannity was, Hillary Clinton might have been the prohibited front runner until, and he pretty much said, we put together something that you may have heard of, which was a select committee to investigate what happened in Benghazi. And we put that together, he pretty much outright said, so that we could make sure that those poll numbers would tank. And his line to Hannity was, and where are her poll numbers today?
Exactly. I mean, he really, without saying it, he connected the two. And that made the Republican establishment just go crazy. He's already been repudiated by a couple of people online and re-explained by by some. So this is sort of catching fire on both sides for obviously different reasons on the Democratic and Republican sides. But he said what it was. As we just were speaking, was like an open secret in D.C.
Yeah. The pretty much the Democrats called it a witch hunt from the start. They debated high and low whether to even put members from their party onto this, quote, select committee. Because these select committees, basically, folk, if you remember, they had select committees for the JFK assassination, they had select committees for Watergate, they had select committees for investigating the 9/11 tragedy. They've had a number of these select committees, but they were always designed to investigate something that was seriously of a major impact to this national ethos on what meant something to this country. And the Benghazi thing, as far as most of the general public and the media and definitely the Democrats didn't rise to the level of Watergate, didn't rise to the level of 9/11, didn't rise to the level of any number of other select committees that were established. And so when they formed this select committee to investigate Benghazi, Democrats said this is a witch hunt to try to get Hillary Clinton.
Right.
And the rest of the media was saying, well, you know, what I mean, a select committee? Well, but anyway, the party line on the Republican side was, we're doing this to get to the bottom of the truth.
Right.
Well, there have been 3, maybe 4 other congressional investigations on the Benghazi story. And I call it a story because I don't want to call it an incident, because 4 American lives were lost.
Including an ambassador. And to try to denigrate the significance of losing those lives by turning an investigation into partisan politics, everybody was kind of up in arms about that being the thrust of this, quote, select committee. And the Democrats said that from day one, and the Republicans kept saying they were trying to get to the bottom of the truth. Well, the other 3 investigations have all been wrapped up, and none of them found anything untoward in the entire Benghazi affair. Right. They, like you said, they wrapped up, and there was nothing that came to the level of what the Republicans wanted to find in the results of the investigation.
You mean somebody was at fault and should have lost their job and should not be eligible to run for president?
Well, exactly.
I'm just phrasing it bluntly because they've been trying to couch it in different terms.
Right.
And I say somebody should be at fault and should not be running for president because the only person that was involved in Benghazi was the Secretary of State,
which would have been
Hillary Clinton, who is now a presidential candidate on the Democratic side. So the fact that Kevin McCarthy came right out on Sean Hannity and said, well, we put together this committee, and guess what? Her poll numbers have subsequently plummeted, basically was letting the cat out of the bag. But Bob, I have to tell you, the key part of that whole exchange for me wasn't the fact that he had acknowledged the open secret that we basically in the media had already figured out. It was Sean Hannity in his role as news commentator or whatever he calls himself, because basically we don't think Fox, we've said it on Media Watch before, it's fake news, it's not really a news organization, but they like to pretend that they are still news people. And but Sean Hannity's response to Kevin McCarthy at the height of his letting the cat out of the bag was, oh yeah, right, we've got to give you points for that. Right. Now, for a so-called journalist to say to somebody, oh, great job, we've got to give you points for that one. I just shook my head when I saw that exchange and said, okay, we don't have a problem calling them fake news because they keep proving to us and the general public that they're just fake news people. So, but I think we beat that story enough. What do you think?
Well, I'm just looking forward to the chaos on the floor of Congress when it comes time to actually make that vote and figure out who's going to lead who's going to be the next speaker, because McCarthy put a big shoe in his mouth with this comment. So I'm looking forward to the mess.
Yeah. Well, you know what? It's interesting because part of why Boehner had hung in there for as long as he did, despite all the crazy backstabbing, backbiting that the rest of his caucus was trying to do, was he actually wanted to keep the government governing. I mean, he saw his duty as Speaker of the House, and I've heard him saying on more than one occasion, my first duty is to respect the traditions and the office of Speaker of the House, and we need to do what's right by that office. And so for him, shutting down the government was never an option, and he's never ever been one to say, well, just because I don't get my way, I'm going to take us to the brink, and then we're going to go over the brink. He was not that kind of brinkmanship person. And so John Boehner, for me, was a guy who actually voted his conscience, did what he felt was right in the interests of the country. And I'm kind of sorry to see him go, because who knows what else is going to take his place, or who else is going to take his place in this crazy House-controlled Congress.
I see in him a little bit of Bob Dole, even though Bob Dole was never Speaker of the House. But as much as I didn't agree with Bob Dole's politics, I always got the feeling that he always had the best interests of the country at heart.
You are a target with that.
I mean, he had a different method that I would have chosen, but I think that I see a little bit of Dole in Boehner, and simply because he wanted to collaborate and caucus with the president, with the White House now and then, that was his undoing with the far right.
Yeah, I think you're right. And just as Dole, from the time he served in World War II to coming back and going into the Senate, always had the best interests of the country at heart. My gut sense is that John Boehner, despite his ideological differences with the other side of the aisle, he also had the best interests of the country at heart. My assessment. Now, unfortunately, he couldn't control a lot of those far-right individuals, and so that's why we had that government shutdown. Was that a year and a half ago?
Yeah.
Almost 2 years ago?
Yeah.
Just because he really couldn't control them. And despite the fact that he didn't want it to happen, it did happen. And I believe he was saying to them this time around, let's not go there again.
Yes.
Basically, his resignation may have actually helped them to realize maybe this is not the time to shut the government down. But all they did was kick the can down the road till December. So come December, we're going to be faced with this craziness all over again.
Yeah, I'm afraid so. But your assessment is on target.
So, but enough of the craziness that's still facing us. Let's dig back into some more of the not so well noised about stories that to pick up on our last show. The last show we talked about the young Muslim 14-year-old in Texas,
right,
who had built a clock and then found himself in handcuffs by the local police department because they thought his clock was a bomb, and as a result of that, he got a lot of negative publicity, which got flipped on its ear and ended up with a lot of very positive publicity, including an invitation to visit the White House, visit MIT, the whole world. Well, interestingly enough, the corollary to that, which actually I didn't even see the story, but one of our good resource persons, Pearl Duncan, brought it to our attention. There was another teenager, this time a black teenager out of Georgia, who basically evidently was irate about the fact that this young Muslim boy had been invited to the White House by the president. And he evidently did a particular video where he totally irately chastised the president and talked about him not even inviting any wives and family members of slain police officers to the White House, but he'd invite this 14-year-old Muslim boy to the White House.
Using Muslim as if it was a pejorative.
Yes. And so he became a darling of the right wing on social media. I think there was a story, a very interesting story that came out of it, because once Pearl brought it to our attention, and I thank you, Pearl Duncan, we went and researched it, and immediately a whole bunch of right-wing places, and I'm quoting a story from the Washington Post, by the way, which came out after all these other stories. But the Washington Post story headlines, "Why did a 13-year-old conservative star apparently hoax the White House?" And it's written by David Weigel, and it was posted on the Washington Post on September 25th. But in his story, and we'll give you some more out of it, he quotes the fact that the conservative site, Twitchy, the conservative site that aggregates Twitter, reported that the White House was afraid of a 13-year-old boy. The Daily Caller matter-of-factly reported that Pearson, C.J. Pearson is the young boy's name, Pearson had been blocked by the White House Twitter account, as did Breitbart, as did other conservative news sites. So basically, when this story hit, the kid got a lot of publicity, and then all of a sudden he published a Twitter message stating, "I have been blocked by the President of the United States' Twitter account." And he went viral with that story. And like Dave Weigel said, conservative media just ran with it. But Weigel started to dig into the story and said, well, wait a minute. Is there any record of anybody ever being blocked? So why don't you read some of that top part of how Dave Weigel dug back into it. Matter of fact,
well, I guess this bottom part sort of explains it.
Sure.
Which quote were you shooting for? Well, I mean, at first, no one questioned this.
The Twitter blocking report.
The conservative site, Twitchy, the conservative site that aggregates Twitter wars, reported that the White House was, quote, afraid of a 13-year-old boy. The Daily Caller matter-of-factly reported that Pearson had been blocked, as did you just read this, and but the White House Assistant Press Secretary Frank Beninati swiftly tweeted that Pearson was wrong and that nobody is or has ever been blocked from the POTUS Twitter account. That sent skeptics looking for cases where the account had blocked hostile accounts, and it inspired a new video from Pearson, et cetera, which we
500,000 views, and he claimed that the White House was lying. So I mean, it's interesting because 1 week you have a 14-year-old Muslim boy chastised, arrested, handcuffed, blah, blah, blah. A couple weeks later, you have a 13-year-old black Georgia young teenager lionized by, and I believe, where is this? Oh, yeah. The black Georgia teenager whose activism and online success had made him a youth outreach chairman for Senator Ted Cruz's campaign. So now he's being lionized, and he's a darling of the right-wing media. And the interesting thing about it is, when he got into the Twitter thing and started claiming that he had been blocked, right-wing folk, Oliver Darcy, who reports for The Blaze, which is a Glenn Beck news aggregation site, and Glenn Beck is not the far left, folk, as you all well know. Glenn Beck is a little bit to the right. This particular reporter is the one who decided to dig into this young man's claim that he'd been blocked by the White House Twitter account. And in asking some seriously hard-pressing questions, he put the kid in a defensive mode. So the kid then, Quan Pearson, decided he had to warn his spokespeople that he was going to take a hit from the Blaze site. And so he put the word online, expect something to come out that's not going to be the greatest thing for me. But he didn't say whether or not it was going to be true or not. And so, to make the long story short, folks, it turns out that they could trace back the fact that using all the online sleuthing techniques, that there was no real blocking by the presidential account.
And he lists it here, and it's research you and I could have done, which brings to the question,
Why did the rest of the media do a little checking?
Right.
Like,
Because it was so
Right.
obvious, and what
Yeah.
the items that are pointed out here are things that I, as a journalist, could easily check. Whether he's actually still following the account, you can just go through the list
Yeah.
and find his name among the followers.
Yeah.
If you had the right, you don't want to go through millions of names, but there's software that can help you with that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
a lot of things went wrong in the reporting of this story.
Oh yeah, and I think part of the reason why the right wing fell in love with him is because on one side you had a brown-skinned Muslim youth who's being lionized by the White House and quote the left media, and then here comes this darling wonderkind,
Yes.
13-year-old black Georgia teenager who Ted Cruz fell in love with, and as Weigel's story closed, reached on Twitter and his campaign email, Pearson did not respond to any questions. But according to Cruz spokesman Rick Tyler, C.J. Pearson remains part of the campaign.
Yes.
So they're still in love with him, despite the fact that there may be some stuff wrong with his, quote, 13-year-old punditry skills.
Yes, but I'm happy to say on the other side of that coin, I attended the Social Good Summit at the 92nd Street Y this week, and among the notable people who were present included Bill Clinton, Madeleine Albright, and Ahmed Mohammed. He was he showed up in New York for this event, so he's still getting his props for his. And he's still getting the support, so that was good to see this week in New York.
So the clock builder still is riding a wave
Yes.
of good, productive publicity.
Yes, he is.
Great. But you notice all those people you named, Madeleine Albright, Bill Clinton, they're all right-wing Democratic people.
Hey, everybody was allowed in the house.
Okay. Those were all left-wing Democratic people,
Yes,
not right-wing.
Yes, I was wondering where you were going with that. Yes.
Yeah, sometimes I get my left and right confused,
Yes.
folks.
But
I think
no.
we've still got a little bit of time
Yeah,
to
how about
to
6
talk
minutes?
about some other interesting things. There's a funny story, since we talk about media. When you see this, folk, there was and this goes to the heart of how poorly the state of journalism has fallen these days. And not just television news that we beat up on all the time, but even print media, and even one of the stalwarts that you could count on in the good old days of great professional journalism. But Yankee, great, fabulous, I think 10 World Series championship rings. Probably one of the winningest baseball player, winningest sports figure of all time. Yogi Berra
Yes.
passed away, and lots of news stories came out. There were a lot of headlines. But Bob, I would like you to share with our viewers one of the headlines and one of the reports that came out that just speaks to why you still need good copy editors and at least some kind of editing staff in any publication, whether it's print, online, wire service or not.
Yes, and it's a simple report. This was probably the first bulletin they put out, the Associated Press, but it reads, New York, AP. New York Yankees Hall of Fame catcher Yogi Berra has died. He was 90. Yogi B-E-A-R. Yes.
Yogi Berra.
The cartoon character.
Right now, I know my kids grew up watching Yogi Berra,
Yes.
and who knows how many other kids still watch Yogi Berra. And yes, I understand from some of the reports I read that Yogi Berra
Yes.
hated any association with the top hat, bow-tied
Yes.
bear, cartoon bear.
Right.
He just was irate when people would compare him or make that association. And what did the AP do on his
Yes.
obit headline? But call Yogi Berra Yogi Bear. I mean, it is not ironic. It is just unacceptable. It is just terrible.
The AP that you and I remember from the days of the ticker, to get a bulletin like this across, you know how many eyes it has to go past before the final person pushes the button and pushes that bulletin out? This clearly went past
Nobody. That's right. But
And
as we've said before on this program, things used to be good, and maybe there's a new generation of young folk coming up who will try to make it good again.
We can only hope.
We can only hope, because basically what's happening is all these outlets, all these organizations, all these organs, whatever you want to call them, they're all trying to do more with less. Less people, less money. They don't want to pay you what you're worth. They want one person to wear 5 hats. And so that particular person who wrote that headline probably was doing 6 other things when he dashed off that headline, or when she, I don't even want to say he, could have been a she, dashed off that headline. And guess what, folks? We, the general public, I take myself out of the media role and into the consuming part of it now, because we still consume this stuff, even though we try to keep an eye on it as observers. We suffer, and the general public suffers, because it's not as good as it used to be. It's not as professional as it once was, and we can only hope that we'll help turn that tide and get it back to what it is by doing what we do, calling attention to all these mistakes and faux pas that happen.
Right, and the public can do the same by just keeping an eye out and letting all of the major channels, all of the major newspapers, all of the major radio stations, they have email addresses. You can report mistakes to it, and I do it all the time.
Let them know you're paying attention. Let them know they actually have viewers. Let them know they have listeners. Let them know they have readers, and that you are concerned about how well they report the news, how accurately, even in the typos, even in the correctness of the names, and whether or not they're giving it to you without any bias, without skewing anything. And so, yeah, that's our charge to our viewers for this issue.
And as you know, I do a little work for the New York Daily News, and that paper was just taken off the sale block by Mortimer Zuckerman. And so he's keeping the paper, but a lot of cuts were made over the last couple of weeks, on the order of 35, 40 people, including names like Mike Lupiker and Bill Madden from the sports side. But a lot of the editorial side folks are gone, and so I hope they can keep the quality up with the people they have left.
I heard rumors that there were mumblings about the fact that it might have to cut back from a daily to 3 times a week or something to that. Did you see anything about that?
The spokesman for the paper asserted that they would remain a full-week publication, and that going to like a 3-week like they've done in other cities and going online digital for the rest of the week is not happening here yet. Okay,
yes. Because...
But he didn't say yet. He just
I heard you. That's our editorial comment. My only take on that is, if they do that, they will no longer be able to call themselves the Daily News.
I agree. I agree. And we have about 30 seconds.
So there's some things we meant to get to dealing locally with some issues dealing with the New York City Public School, but you know what? We're going to save that for another show.
We can go in depth.
See if we can bring some other guests in to talk about some of those issues. So with that, why don't we say, this has been Media Watch. I'm Eric Tate.
I'm Bob Anthony.
We thank MNN and EBT Educational Productions, and we will catch you the next time.